Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to your workshop today to talk to you about how Ireland is supporting young people in their career choices. Today I'm going to speak to you about whole school guidance in Ireland. I'm absolutely thrilled to have been invited to speak with your workshop today. It's unfortunate we don't get to actually visit Estonia, because it would be lovely to visit again sometime. So when we look historically at how things have developed from government legislation 23 years ago and government guidelines in 2005, from 2005 to 2016, we had slow developments nationally. You'll also recognize, well, in Ireland, there was a financial crash in those years. So there was less developments at national level, but we were very much involved in the work at European level in the ELGPN, the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network. In 2016, the Department of Education published what's called the Programme Recognition Framework, and I will come back to that to explain about the training of guidance counsellors. In 2017, then, NCGE, we developed the Whole School Guidance Framework that I am going to explain to you. Over the last couple of years also, because of COVID and government review of career guidance, the information that has been generated by those reports and that work has also informed the work that we're doing now too. At the end of this presentation is a link to all of these various documents. So I will make the presentation available to your colleagues so that you will have access to all of this information. Okay. So, as I mentioned, the Programme Recognition Framework. This was a crucial document for the Department of Education and Skills to clarify what training a guidance counsellor needed in order to work in a school or a further education and training sector into the future. And while this program, this set of competencies were agreed in 2016 and published then, it took a number of years for the process to develop so that in all of the universities providing training for guidance counsellors in Ireland now, these processes are in place since September of last year. So in every university, wherever it is, whether it's in Dublin or in Limerick or in County Kildare in Ireland, all students of guidance counselling will be developing these competences based on an understanding that the work that they will do in a school will be design, deliver and evaluate guidance learning and development programs for the three areas, that they will understand how to provide labour market information and career-related information through the use of ICT. So that's a crucial development, that the guidance counsellors are developing those ICT skills at college level initially. That the trainee guidance counsellors will be trained in the use of psychometric testing, but that they will also be developing their own skills in networking and collaboration and leading and managing a guidance service, so that they are not, there is an understanding that the guidance counsellor is central to the work, not just working by themselves with students. There is a policy to the work that they're doing also. Within the school developments also, the Department of Education issues what are called circulars every year, which determine the allocation of guidance in each school. So whether a school can have a full-time member of staff, a part-time member of staff, depending on how many students that they have. And also that a guidance counsellor will administer and use psychometric assessments and the rules and the guidelines surrounding the use of those assessments. So when a guidance counsellor is working with a student, they know that there is good practice guidelines for the use of psychometric tests with that student. Also, as part of the work over the last 20 years, the Department of Education funds what's called the supervision program for guidance counsellors. So this is putting in place the supports for guidance counsellors to consider their own practice, to work in peer review with others, and also to have a qualified supervisor check in with them about their work. So again, when a guidance counsellor is working with a student who is making a career choice or an education choice, there will be a personal social development aspect to their work. If that student is having personal development difficulties or psychological issues, the guidance counsellor has supervision for working with that student and those students with those issues. Our whole school guidance framework, which I will explain, looks at both the delivery of the guidance program and the development of the competences of the student. So we've looked at the competence of the guidance counsellor to work with these students, and the framework then is the competence of the students, that the guidance are helping the students to develop those skills. A key part of the work that we do to support the whole school guidance framework is the development of resources. And we deliver CPD then for guidance counsellors, reflecting that whole school approach. We develop resources, materials, templates. We deliver webinars, especially due to COVID. Those webinars were very successful. We were able to run face-to-face workshops before the COVID pandemic, which we can't do at the moment, unfortunately. Okay. Before I move further in relation to guidance, it's important also to recognise that from a government Department of Education perspective here in Ireland, there is a recognition of the need to focus on well-being for the student and the teachers and guidance counsellors in the schools. So in a parallel process to the development of the whole school guidance approach, it is a requirement, a policy requirement of the Department of Education that every school will have its well-being policy statement and framework. And this is based on the World Health Organization definition of what well-being is. So well-being is present when a person realizes their potential, is resilient in dealing with the normal stresses of their life, takes care of their physical well-being, and has a sense of purpose, connection, and belonging to their wider community. So you'll see that in the definition of well-being from the World Health Organization, there's a reflection of what we do with guidance, which is if the student has developed their own sense of themselves, they will be able to develop, hopefully, their education and career purpose and their path throughout life. And every school in the country is required now to have a well-being policy statement. The support model in schools for all of this well-being work, including guidance work, is this continuum of support model, so that the school provides support for all students and support for some students and support for a few students. That can be special educational needs. That can be extracurricular subject support for extra English for students who do not have English as their second language, as their first language. So every school has a requirement to provide all of the necessary supports through that school in collaboration with external agencies. So taking on board the developments over the historically, taking on board the program recognition framework and the understanding, I see some questions, so I will come back to that. How do I differentiate in practice? I will come back to that question, thank you. So taking the information from a historical perspective and the program recognition framework and the activities of guidance and the competences of guidance, NCGE worked to develop and publish this whole school guidance framework. Ultimately, the aim is always about developing the guidance program so that the student will benefit ultimately. This is always, the outcome is always that the student will benefit from this program. When to answer that question, how do we differentiate practice, guidance for all, guidance for a few? I will come to that now in explaining how this works in the context of guidance planning. Okay, if I can move this on. Okay, so firstly, when we look at the competences of the student, we look at the whole school guidance approach to the competence development of the student developing myself. So learning about themselves, learning about their positive self-esteem, how to positively and proactively interact with others, develop their learning, and in that case, learning about exam strategies, making educational and subject choices based on their career aspirations. So for example, if a student is particularly interested in history or geography, is that an area that will interest them from a career perspective, or are they just interested in it because they have a genuine interest in how the world has developed, the history of their country, how their grandparents grew up? So how do they relate their learning to their future? And also developing my career path. So over the course of the 6 years, they learn about career information, how to find that career information, how to understand, to develop an understanding of what that career looks like, what working in that career would look like. And also through the development of all of those competencies, be able to personalize them, integrate that information into themselves, and make a decision at the end of school, coming up to the age of 17 or 18, as to what career I think I might like, or what education program I would like to do, and go this direction with the career and go that direction when I'm a little bit older. There's a question, what is the main challenge at the moment for career guidance specialists in schools? The main challenge realistically is there is one of them possibly in a school of 400 students. So where we advocate that the students will benefit from this work, we are not suggesting that the guidance counsellor has to do all of this work. We advocate that they do it in the context of the working with the whole school. Another main challenge for the guidance counsellors in schools at the moment is the personal development side of that career guidance program, especially with schools going back now full-time into school, where students have been out of school for so long. They've been engaged like this on Zoom. They may have disengaged. There may be family issues because of COVID. There might be bereavement or illness in the family because of COVID. There might be parents have lost their jobs because of COVID. And the challenge then for the guidance counsellor is that the students are feeling this on a personal development level and a psychological level. And there is a lot of anxiety. So actually it's those two issues. You know, there is one guidance counsellor, or maybe two if it's a very, very big school, and the students have a lot of anxiety because of and due to COVID. I hope that's answered that question. Okay, so when we're looking at the developing myself, developing my learning, and developing my career path, those competences may not just be part of a career guidance class. They might be part of what we call the social, personal, and health education class. So there might be other teachers who are incorporating some of these competences into their courses also. Okay. So go back to the question, how do we differentiate guidance for all, guidance for some, and guidance for a few? So this is our wheel because it's a circle. We didn't find any other exciting name for it. And the thanks, Margit. Actually, your question is good timing because it will explain, the wheel will explain. So where you ask, responsibility seems to be huge, both in terms of volume and activity. Are there any other professionals in school or school guidance counselors share the responsibility with inside and outside? So essentially, yes, is the answer. So in looking at guidance as a whole school approach, we advocate that the guidance counsellor and the school management will look at the needs of the students in their school. Is it a rural school, an urban school, a city centre based school, a disadvantaged school in an economically disadvantaged area? And they look at the needs of those students. Are they mostly from areas where there is very little employment, or are they from an advantaged area where most of the parents from that school have actually all got third level qualifications? And what are the needs of those students? And then this first circle here talks about who are the other teachers, professionals, teachers and professionals within the school that the guidance counsellor can link with. So for example, we have what are called the learning support teacher or the special educational needs coordinator. So as an example, if a student has specific learning difficulties, for example, dyslexia or autism, through our legislation, they will be in what's called a mainstream school. They will not necessarily be in a specialized school for people with disabilities. So they will have a special needs assistant working with that student in the school, and they'll have a coordinator of the special needs supports in the school. So the guidance counsellor would work with that special education needs coordinator, where the needs of that particular student are identified, and perhaps that special needs coordinator will be the liaison with the parents. It might not have to be the guidance counsellor. In another case, for example, we talk about the school chaplain. So in some schools in Ireland, because of the historical connection to religious orders, there might be somebody from a religious background as the chaplain, or there might be an assigned person as the chaplain. And that school chaplain might provide some of the personal counselling, personal supports for the student. So the guidance counsellor might identify that the student has additional personal development needs, and it would be the school chaplain or what's called a pastoral care teacher who might work with that student on a more regular one-to-one basis. But again, that will depend on if those teachers, if those positions are available in the school. Also, we expect that school management will have a role in ensuring that the guidance counsellor has the facilities that he or she needs, access to a computer room for IT-based guidance classes and school research. In the wider circle here, we talk about the different types of programs that the guidance service, the guidance counsellor would be involved in. So I mentioned psychometric testing. So this would be the teachers might deliver standard ability tests, and the guidance counsellor would deliver on the aptitude tests. And the guidance counsellor would then have an idea, okay, well, Mary or John is struggling with their maths or their English, but they're doing really well in art. and they're doing really well in technical drawing classes. So there is a difference in their skills, and maybe that student might need to be assessed for dyslexia or other difficulties. And we need to focus on the skills and abilities they do have when we're looking at their future career and education options. So it's very much the guidance counsellor working with the other school teams. And when I mentioned the wellbeing policy statement in schools, every school is required to have what's called a wellbeing or care team or support team. So the guidance counsellor would be very much part of that team in the school. When we talk about then guidance for all, guidance for some, and guidance for a few, what we mean by that is that every student who comes into the new post-primary school in first year should have an opportunity to find out about, to learn about the supports that are available to them in the school. It might be the guidance counsellor delivering that class, or it might be another teacher. But it's a conscious awareness of everybody in the school that the student needs to feel supported, comfortable, and settled in the school so that they will be able to engage with their subjects as they're going through those subjects. Also, in the context of guidance for all, if you go to the 5th and 6th years, it is ensuring then that every 5th year or every 6th year has an opportunity to explore college open days and gets an opportunity to go maybe as a group from the school to a college open day. When we talk about guidance for some, this is where the guidance counsellor and school management will have identified, okay, there's a group of students who, for example, they are high achievers and they all want to do medicine. So maybe we could work with those students very specifically on work experience in a particular area. Or maybe we have a group of students who have come to live in Ireland from other countries and their English may not be so good. So we need to bring them together and make sure their parents have extra information and the students have extra information in relation to their career and education planning. For the guidance for a few then, we are absolutely talking then about the one-to-one guidance provision. So not group work, not information work, but the one-to-one work with the guidance counsellor. So you'll see there we talk about the guidance counsellor then engaging with the wider community. So higher education organisations, here these are our examples in Ireland, the various different national agencies. And what we have done with the training of schools, the introduction of this whole school guidance model into schools, we provided this training originally through seminars where guidance counsellors and school principals would attend. And we would talk through, well, what does this look like in your school? And we provided a resource, which is essentially this document, but it's blank. And we asked the guidance counsellor and the school principal to fill in the gaps. What are the other teachers that you're working with? What are the external agencies that you're working with? And if you feel that actually there are gaps in your thinking on this in your own school, what can you do to address it in your school? Because every school in Ireland is going to be a little bit different to the next, depending on which teachers they have, which subjects they have, and again, if they're an advantaged school, if they're a disadvantaged schools. So the webinars that we developed to provide the further training on introducing this framework to schools all through COVID actually meant that more guidance counsellors, more school principals were able to attend the webinars because we were not asking them to leave their school. They could sit at their desk for 2 hours. they could engage with us and ask questions like some of you are doing now, and take away the exercise and come back and let us know how they were getting on. And again, the focus is always the student at the end of it. So it's always about focusing on the student's learning and guidance and competence development throughout this process. So while the framework made sense and makes sense, that is about the planning of the guidance service, the delivering of the guidance service in the school system. And traditionally in Ireland, where there was maybe less funding for guidance, but still there was a need to provide guidance, that would have always been focused on the 5th years and the 6th years, or the students in transition year, subject choice, university open days, researching careers when you're 16, 17 and starting to make decisions. So there's not quite a curriculum, but there's a standard of practice that every guidance counsellor would be aware of for the senior cycle program. And what became very obvious through the webinars, the face-to-face seminars, was that the guidance counsellors and the school principals were saying, we don't know what to do with our 12-year-olds, with our 13-year-olds, the students who are in 1st year, 2nd year and 3rd year. What do we do with them? You don't start talking to a 14-year-old who is in their 2nd year of post-primary or high school. You don't start talking to them about applications for universities. You don't start talking about, well, you need this, you need to get this in your exam results in 6th year. But what you do start to do is introduce the concept of career and what subjects are important for making a decision. For example, if eventually you would like to do an apprenticeship as a carpenter, it would be a really good idea to do a woodwork class for your leaving certificate. So from the feedback from the schools, my colleagues here in NCGE developed what we call guidance-related learning. And again, this guidance-related learning absolutely takes on board the competence framework that we talked about of developing myself, developing my learning, and developing my career path. And these resources were developed so that the guidance counsellor or another teacher could deliver a class to 1st years who are 12 or 13, 2nd years who are 13, 14, and 3rd years who are kind of 14, 15, maybe 16, depending on what age they were when they came into post-primary. And these resources provide an opportunity for short-term classroom-based activities on looking at my values, looking at what's of important to me, what family, what careers do I know about through my own family. So as an example, and when you have the presentation, that link will bring you directly into this, this facility to access those resources. They're on a zip file because they're in Word and PDF format for a student, for a guidance counsellor to use in schools. You're welcome to have a look at them. You're welcome to try them out if it's valuable to you. And if you do, please let us know. They are in English. They're not in Estonian. So we haven't translated them. But please, if you engage with them, please let us know. So as an example then, just going on to the next page. So as an example of one of the modules and one of the class groups in 2nd year, which the student will be about 14, 15, one of the modules within that program is on my pathways. So beginning to consider or find out about options for after post-primary school. And part of this work is also about encouraging the student that if they stay at school to complete their leaving certificate and they do the subjects that are of interest for their career, this will be of benefit to them in the long run. And you're talking there about what OECD are now talking about, career alignment. So having a sense of, well, if I do geography for my leaving cert, I might be able to do a course in environmental sciences, for example, or I could become a park ranger or a zookeeper because I've learned about geography and ecology. So at the end of this particular module, the outcome for the student, and again, as I say, this is all about what the benefit for the student. The student should be able to identify the necessary entry requirements for going on to college or work or an apprenticeship. So if I want to do an apprenticeship, as I mentioned, as a carpenter, doing woodwork in school would be a good idea. If I want to do an apprenticeship in the insurance industry, which we have here in Ireland, maybe if I do a course in business studies, that will help me towards my apprenticeship in insurance. Looking at those subjects and also what skills are needed so that they can start looking at, well, if I get a part-time job or I get a work experience when I'm in 4th year in childcare, I'll have a better sense of if that's something I'd like to do. So it's not about asking them to make decisions. It's about teaching them how to do the research and begin the consideration of these career plans. They'll also be clear about who are the best supports for them in the school, whether it's their special education teacher, or it's the guidance counselor, or it's another teacher, like the science teacher who has connections with science companies. Who else in the school will be of use and support to them? As an outcome, because obviously, well, not obviously, but there is no exam in these particular programs that we advocate for the students, we ask them to write a letter to their future self about their hopes and their wishes at that point on their journey. So we're asking them to start thinking ahead, my daughter, who is in her 20s, uses the phrase manifest. I'm not sure how that would translate in Estonian, but it is about visualizing the future and having an understanding of, well, this is what I think I might like to do into the future, and write that letter and put it somewhere safe. So, as I've mentioned, those resources we have developed, for example, with Junior Cycle. And in the planning of the whole school guidance program, then, we have also developed resources based on this framework, for example, working with 6th years, or in the direct delivery of guidance to the 6th years, the students who are planning their career choices, or resources for the guidance counselor and the school principal to engage with a planning, a review, an evaluation, and a strategic planning process. So we have developed resources, webinars on these particular topics. And when you have access to the presentation, if you click on those links in those circles, they will bring you directly to the webinars and the resources for each of those particular developments. As one example, just to show you that using these resources with the students and the benefit again and support for the students, one example is we have a questionnaire on taking stock for 6th years. So a questionnaire specifically for the 6th years on, well, where am I with my future plans? Do I understand application systems? How am I feeling in myself? Do I know who I need to talk to? And just giving the 6th years a checklist so that they can, identify their own needs and arrange to speak with the guidance counselor then on, okay, I'm here. I know exactly where I want to go and I've made my application. Or do you know, I'm here, I'm still not sure, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm really, really stuck. And the guidance counsellor then has information to work with the student, and the student can start to reflect on themselves also. Remembering as well that at this point, the students who are in 6th year now, or were in 6th year last year, did not do guidance related learning when they were in 1st year, 2nd year, or 3rd year, because we have only introduced that guidance related learning program in the last academic year, sorry, in the 2020 to 2021 academic year. One of the resources that was developed for 6th years was where the students had completed their Leaving Cert. As they were about to walk out the door of the school, the guidance counsellor could give them a resource to say, okay, these are the dates you need to remember. This is the information you need to remember. These are the contact details you need to remember. So when your exam results come out, here's the website to check. When you get your application for college, sorry, your offer of your college place or your apprenticeship place or your workplace, here's the information and the links to the organizations you might need to check, so that there is a handover and supporting the student rather than just saying, goodbye, you've left our school, we're not working with you anymore. As I've mentioned, in the guidance program in schools, we talk about personal and social and careers and educational program. So this particular questionnaire would be looking at, whoops, sorry, sorry, can you still see that screen? Sorry, I thought yeah, great, thanks, Margit. So this particular questionnaire is looking at the 6th years reflecting, where am I before I leave school? This tip sheet is for a 6th year after they have left school. And we also have developed templates for schools so that they can develop what we call the support for students document. It's very straightforward. I'm sure you guys do this also yourself. And this is ensuring that every student has a list of internal and external support services in their local area. So the local, youth information centre, the local, we have a number of youth mental health services have developed in Ireland, especially during COVID, and a lot of online website-based developments have grown up through COVID. So we asked the guidance counsellor to update this template in their school for what's relevant in their region for their students. So again, providing the supports on a personal, social, careers, educational perspective. We're okay for time? So one of the, before I go on, actually, has anyone any questions at this point? Happy to take any questions at this point. No? Okay, we'll keep going. That's great. As I've mentioned, obviously, well, not obviously, but in Ireland, and from what we hear from the OECD survey of what was happening across the country in guidance delivery, most schools across the world closed during the COVID pandemic. Schools where there was a high level of IT interaction, it was very simple for them to move into an IT delivery program. In Ireland, that was not very simplified. Schools were told by government rightly, you're closing on the end of this week and you will not be open for another few weeks, which turned into months. So schools in Ireland had to go from classroom-based, paper-based delivery of our education programs to an online, internet-based education delivery for all students, whether they were primary school, post-primary school, higher education, further education. And our service here, we were not working in the office also, so everything was online. And that posed difficulties then for the delivery of guidance and the supports for students, where guidance counsellors were normally providing their guidance sessions in classrooms in one-to-ones. So a lot of the work that we did back last year in the context of school closures was looking at the development of digitalized guidance. So guidance delivered by ICT means, whether this was the guidance counsellor then developing the website for career guidance for their school, or if they didn't already have one, and in a lot of cases they didn't have one, or they had one and it was not updated and had not been used for many, many years, or students based on their own circumstance, maybe not having access to broadband or Wi-Fi, or an actual PC or laptop or phone to access their education program, or maybe they were only accessing their education program on their phone, which would have been very, very difficult. And how does the guidance counsellor then work to support the student when everything is online? So we worked with the Department of Education. We worked with colleagues across Europe and connected with different organizations to look at, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about guidance in a digitalized way? And the learning really from the delivery of guidance from an online perspective to support students is that a number of guidance counsellors have continued to do some of this work online ever since. So many of them found that by developing a Teams channel or a WhatsApp group or a particular portal on the school website, they could interact with parents and students. They could post up, well, here's an assignment on career research that I want the fifth years to do. Maybe the guidance counsellor wasn't going to see them for classroom activity, but the interaction would be online. So the guidance counsellors were, in some cases, developing their own online skills while they were teaching their students how to do this. And in some cases, the guidance counsellors were, looking to NCGE for guidelines on, well, if I'm working with a student on a one-to-one basis for a personal development issue, what are the guidelines for confidential practice there? So a lot of the work we looked at was, what is professional delivery of guidance services using online facilities? And again, we developed a webinar in that respect, and there's a link there. We developed that in conjunction with Dublin City University, where the college professor there was also providing training to the trainee guidance counsellors. As I've mentioned, the program recognition framework, that is a requirement for new guidance counsellors coming into the arena and working in the sector. Okay. So I'm nearly finished, and I'd be very happy to take any questions. I see a chat there, and just go to that. Do we have ethical standards in guidance? Is e-guidance included and considered? Thank you, Margit, for that. Yes, we do have ethical standards in guidance. So, in Ireland, there are professional bodies who represent the guidance counsellors. 3 that are very particularly involved in the education sector. One is called the Institute of Guidance Counsellors. One is called the Adult Guidance Association, and one is called the Association of Higher Education Career Services. And each of those organizations would have ethical standards and practice for their members. Most guidance counsellors will at least be a member of the Institute of Guidance Counsellors. And while that organization very much works, the majority of the members of that organization work in schools. A number of people who work in adult guidance or other areas are also members. And there's very, very good detailed ethical guidelines for standards of practice from a, as a guidance counsellor. What does that look like? So, for example, as the director of NCGE, as a qualified guidance counsellor from a long time ago, I would be a member of that professional body. And those ethical guidelines, while they refer to, actual practice and delivery and confidentiality and working with particularly students and adult learners, the overarching ethical standards would be something that would govern our practice here as a director and my colleagues and in NCGE as a whole, because we see that value. From an NCGE perspective, we would also look to the IAEVG and ethical standards and practice that are listed there. We would engage with international ethical standards when we're developing our guidelines. One of the in the delivery of digitalized guidance, I might just go back and see, I think I mentioned it. Sorry, I didn't actually mention it, apologies, in this particular slide, but within the PowerPoint presentation for that particular webinar, we refer to the guidelines that NCGE developed, and also the Department of Education developed guidelines as well. So we were working as, the guidelines from the department are the required operations of schools, and our guidelines were extra tips for guidance counsellors. Oops. See a question. Thanks, Margit, for putting that up. So in providing or in developing guidance to support the learners and their futures, we would take a three-pronged approach, because we don't specifically work with the students themselves. So we look at the policy side, we look at the international good practice side, we look at what does it really look like on the ground? What is the experience in the schools? And we also invite students now and representatives of students to provide their voice to inform us on what they feel guidance looks like in their schools. Does it really work the way we hope it works? Or what way would they like to see guidance developing? And we involved students and the student voice in the development of the guidance related learning. So we continue from an NCGE perspective to develop those good practice guidelines and set those good practice expectations. And you'll see here behind me, may not be too clear, but we have the wheel. And when we deliver the webinars, the one thing that people say to us is, oh yeah, we have that wheel in our office, or we have that wheel in our staff room. And we are hoping now over the next couple of months to engage with schools to find out really how many schools are using the framework, what are they doing in their school, and how is it working for them. Because our figures from our attendance at the webinars would suggest that there was at least 1 or 2 people from every school in the country has attended the webinars, at least kind of 3 or 4 of the webinars on particular topics, which all relate back to whole school guidance. We will continue to provide CPD for the guidance practitioners and the guidance counsellors, and we support and we're part of the steering committee to support and the delivery of that supervision programme for guidance counsellors. Again, if the guidance counsellor is supervised and supported in their work, they can support the student professionally. One concern would be, for example, if a student is experiencing a particular difficulty because of what's going on at home, if that resonates with the guidance counsellor, maybe the guidance counsellor may not be as objective as he or she needs to be. And that supervision program will really, really help that process. Well, we know from feedback that that supervision helps that process. We are continuing to develop resources for the guidance related learning. And we are looking at the possibility of a longitudinal study on guidance related learning to assess the effectiveness. So again, we only delivered it from last year, and we're hoping to work with a couple of a set of schools in the next year to ask them to introduce guidance related learning where they haven't done it yet, and actually, you know, look at evidence, look at data, look at measurements of what the students have learned, what they benefited from this learning. So we're hoping to get into that evidence gathering on that work. Also absolutely involving the student voice to see what they feel about those guidance related learning resources. And we, like I say, looking at the outcomes, because the development of the framework and the policies and the resources to help the guidance counsellor and the school management to deliver guidance, that bit's done. We can do extra resources for that, but now we need to start looking at how is it working? What do we need to change? What do we need to develop? And what resources we need to continue to deliver so that the guidance counsellors can work and ultimately the students can benefit in the long run. So let me see now. So just to show you on the presentation there, all of the links, and all of the links are in the presentation. Please feel free to, you know, get into them. Any resources from an NCG perspective are free, so you don't need to access passwords to get into them. But again, they are all in English. So from a presentation perspective, Aita, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you all. And this is our language in Irish. It's been lovely speaking to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, if that's okay. And I have a question there. There was a question in the chat. Let me see, where's that gone? Okay, so the question in the chat, and please feel free to ask any questions. If you want to turn on your screen, your video, and turn on your microphone and ask a question, or ask Margit to translate a question, I'm more than delighted to speak with you also. So the question here is, do you have supervision available for school staff in general as well, or for other support staff? Not in the same way. So the answer really there would be no, not in the same extent. There are various different associations for different subjects. So for example, there'd be a geography teachers association, and they would provide support and peer support in that respect. The special education needs coordinators would have their own peer support and an organization looking after their training and their CPD. So the supervision would be a very different kind of program to the one that is delivered for the guidance counsellors. And the one for the guidance counsellors really recognizes the counselling aspect of their role, and that overarching personal development and career and education approach. And I suppose as an example, the guidance counsellors will give, if they're explaining about the sort of work that they do in their schools, and explaining why we have the focus of personal and careers and educational as the, you know, all working together. What we find in our schools is that a student will go and request an appointment with the guidance counsellor to talk about career options or education options as an extra option in the guidance for a few, as an addition to the classroom they've been on, the class they've had, or the seminar they've been at, or the open day of a university. And the student may come in with saying to the guidance counsellor, I want to talk about a career plan, but actually they really want to talk about what's personally happening to them. Maybe there's difficulties at home. Okay, we've 6 minutes till the end of the workshop. I've just been notified. So maybe in the word pretense is not the right word, but under the umbrella of talking about careers and education, the students often feel more supported then to be able to talk about their personal difficulties. So a discussion about science subjects and science degrees might become a discussion about my parents split up at the weekend and I can't concentrate and do my homework. And the guidance counsellor can work with the student on all of those issues. So with that in mind, are there other questions, or is there anything you would like me to re-explain in the next couple of minutes? Be delighted to answer any questions for you.
Ma tahaks üles kutsuda, et kui tõesti keegi tahab küsida, siis ja kahtleb oma keeleoskuses või midagi, siis ma tean, siin ruumis on mitmeid, kes suudavad tõlkida ja ma kindlasti valmis aitama, samamoodi mina. Igatahes on väga vaikne, ma ei tea.
It's
very, very quiet in the room.
Okay. It is very hard to take in all of this information all in one go. There's a lot, and I'm very conscious that you guys are listening to me speaking English in an Irish accent on a screen, and that is not always the easiest thing to do. So our contact details for ncge.ie and director at ncge.ie and ncginfo@ncge.ie are at the end of the presentation. I'd be delighted if any of you follow up and ask me any questions. And also from an NCGE perspective, as I mentioned, the resources are available. We produce a bulletin once a month. Now it's very specifically targeted at our guidance community here in Ireland. But if you subscribe on our website, you'll get a link once a month with some updates of information. And twice per year, so in the spring and in the winter, we produce a magazine also called Guidance Matters. And Margit has written for that magazine for us on a number of occasions. So thank you, Margit, for that. There is always a section on Europe and Euroguidance. And we look at, you know, various different developments in Ireland and across the world from a guidance perspective. So on our website, there's a little button at the top of the website, subscribe. You're welcome to put your name in there and you will get updates from us then when those online publications are available. So I think that's it, Margit. I think we've covered our 6 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Jennifer.